Right, back live on In Focus. Minister in the Presidency Khumbudzo Ntshavheni says Cabinet has approved the Public Procurement Bill for submission to Parliament. She says the bill aims to create a single framework for public procurement and to eliminate fragmentation in laws. For more on this, we're now joined by Cosatu's Parliamentary Coordinator, Matthew Parks. Matthew, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. With all the geopolitical tensions and international news, you would think that there's nothing happening here at all, but there's been plenty also happening, it does seem, as far as Cabinet is concerned. Why has this draft or this Public Procurement Bill amendment taken so long?
Look, that's always and good evening, thanks for having us. That's always a question we always ask government across all the departments. They just take forever and a day to bring often very good, very progressive, badly needed bills to NEDLAC, to Parliament, even to Cabinet. But nonetheless, we welcome it. We have been asking as Cosatu to Treasury and to the Presidency to bring this Public Procurement Bill for the past 5 years. We're glad it's now at Cabinet. We want to see it at Parliament by yesterday. We hope they will table it at Parliament in the next 2 weeks because we need to give Parliament space to go through it, to process it, to adopt it. And to be fair to Parliament, they've only got until the end of November to pass any legislation before the next election. So there's not much time. And of course, Parliament has got two houses, the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, and they need to, abide by their constitutional obligations to allow public participation. So we want to give them space to do the job.
Yeah.
But I think for Cosatu, we support the bill. We have engaged on it extensively at NEDLAC. I think we found many areas of common consensus, in fact, most areas, between government and business and trade unions. So I think for us it's a positive platform to overhaul a very archaic, often a very significantly leaking public procurement system across the state. The minister is correct to say it's going to provide for a single public procurement system for the entire state. That's the departments, municipalities, state-owned companies like Eskom and Transnet, local government entities and so forth. It's also going to give the Treasury powers, like we had seen that were discarded by the Constitutional Court last year, to set certain procurement criteria for these institutions of the state to support local procurement, which is key to saving and creating hundreds of thousands of local manufacturing and agriculture and other jobs. It's also going to give powers to Treasury also to set criteria to support, BEE, which also has been discarded by the Constitutional Court last year.
Yeah.
So those first are quite critical. But I think also Thabo, on the issue of corruption is very critical because it's now going to establish a single online portal where all government tenders at any level have to be publicized. So this is going to enable your people like yourselves, the media, NGOs, society at large, disgruntled people, whomever, to go and see who got what tender, and if the things which don't make sense, then the spotlight can be shone on that. And that, we think, is critical to really beginning to uproot the level of corruption, which is quite endemic to our public procurement systems. This is also going to help save significant amounts of money for the fiscus to reduce wasteful expenditure.
Yeah.
And it will also empower the state for certain large-scale items, for example, textbooks or medical supplies, to be centrally procured. And it's also going to help to ensure, costs of scale, save money for the fiscus, etc. So for us, we're quite keen. Let's get it to Parliament. Let's get it passed. Let's get it into law quickly.
Yeah. How is this going to, this strong procurement or central procurement capability going to deal with the human factor? Are you saying that there's not going to be, because I don't think the system is by and large the problem. It's mostly the human factor that comes in and messes around with the system.
Look, so humans will always misbehave. That's the nature of humanity. Whichever organization you have, whether it's government, a political party, businesses, churches, everybody, there's always problems. So the need then is to put in place the systems. And to be fair right now, to be honest, we don't have the systems in place. So there isn't a single public procurement system for the state. So yes, you have a procurement system for departments, doesn't apply to local government, doesn't apply to SOEs. And often these have been the epicenter of state capture and corruption. If you look at Transnet, look at Eskom, look at many of our rural municipalities, there anything goes. Often you find amazing stories of what happens in municipalities where they just simply ask for one company to give 3 written quotes. So this is going to have a single procurement system. It's also going to enable Treasury through the Chief Procurement Office to keep an eye out on procurement across all the state institutions to begin to pick up on trends, to see what are the weak spots, etc. Because you can't rely upon individuals. Individuals are always going to look for a chance to misbehave, but if you strengthen the systems, that's how you're going to begin to effect change, deal with some of the rotten apples, and hopefully you'll also begin to change the culture, because right now our culture is very rotten. We have a tendency of stealing everything, and this is really what's crippling the state on so many fronts. So this for us is, it's not going to be a magic wand. It's not going to be overnight, but it's going to begin to lay the foundations for us to transform the system of the state, to begin to uproot corruption, to begin to shine a spotlight, which is the most effective way of dealing with corruption, is to have maximum amount of transparency and scrutiny by society at large to deal with these issues. It's going to enable, for example, what happened in 2020, where people who had never produced anything in their life overnight got multi-million rand contracts to produce PPEs. It's going to enable those kind of things to expose.
So how is it going to do that? Talk to me. So you've got the system is going to be centralized. What is the recommendation? You've got Matthew, you've got Thabo, you've got Jay, you've got Khadija. They all want to they all want to bid for this particular tender. Are they all now just going to send their qualification and what they're saying they're going to be doing, and media and everybody else is going to be able to see that Matthew is actually he's never produced a toilet paper in his life, so and therefore be able to ask those kinds of questions if Matthew does get the tender?
So one is that it's going to enable a single system across the state. Second is that the National Treasury can begin to set criteria around local procurement, around BE, around cost and so forth. Right now you don't have that. Right now you have everybody doing whatever they want. It also enables the Chief Procurement Office in Treasury to monitor trends and so forth, to ask departments or institutions to explain themselves. Right now they can't do that. It is enabling the Chief Procurement Office, when they think there's malfeasance or wrongdoing taking place, to issue instruction to that institution of government which is procuring it to put a stop to it. So the significant powers. If you couple that with the Auditing Amendment Act, which can now enables government to hold officials personally financially liable when they engage in wrongdoing, that's going to be a powerful combination of a carrot and stick. But also around the single online portal, that all the tenders that have been issued will now be made available to the public at large to go and watch. So it's going to be an online-based platform where anybody, the media, a disgruntled business person who didn't get a contract, a trade union, a political party, members of parliament, anybody can go and see that, how did Thabo get this contract to produce PPEs when yesterday he was in the trick, It's going to enable that kind of scrutiny, because to be honest, that is really the most effective, most powerful tool against corruption, to have maximum transparency.
There's a suggestion of a public procurement regulator. How different is that to, I suppose that it would be vastly different to what the Auditor General does?
So then the public procurement regulator will look more about what is the criteria for public procurement. What kind of scoring do we give to local production, local content, for example, local manufacturers? Or what scoring do we give to BE points? Maybe, for example, want to look at rural areas or persons with disabilities, etc. Or what scoring do we give to the cost of the price and so forth? Also, what is the kind of weighting we give to emergency procurement and so forth? So kind of those requirements. So that's slightly different from the Auditor General, who would have to go and say, okay, explain how you spent your money, what is the good, what are the rules that you followed, did you follow the rules, etc. So those are different things. And we think that it's useful because right now public procurement is a weak link in the state. Public procurement is valued at about 1 trillion rand every single year. It's the largest source of procurement for the entire economy. It's about two-thirds of the state budget annually. So if we can get it right, it can have a huge, powerful, positive effect in the economy to support local companies, help create local jobs, help save the money to the state, and so forth, grow the economy. But if we continue to mess around with it, like we are doing right now, then it really hobbles us on so many different fronts. I think for us, look, it's going to be a learning process. The bill is going to be put to Parliament and so forth. Once Parliament passes the bill and the President signs it, obviously there'll be more regulations that will need to be done. That's where some of the finer detail will be dealt with. But I think for us, this is a good progressive foundation bill to begin to overhaul a very weak part of the system.
How do we then insulate this system from undue influence politically? You know things like Matthews in Cosatu gets to hear of this tender, and Matthew applies for the tender, gets the tender, but Matthew knows he's not going to do it, but Thabo owns a company, so I'll give it to him. But I'll take 40% of the budget and only give Thabo 60%, and Thabo can't finish the project because he doesn't have enough money because 40% went to Matthew.
Yeah. So look, that's a critical thing. That's one of the areas we didn't finalize in our discussion in NEDLAC, to our disappointment, Cosatu. We had initially wanted, on the issue of undue influence, to have a blanket ban on the relatives of politicians from doing business with the state. Look, I think that is maybe a bit ambitious on our part, because where do you draw the line at which relative? Do you just say the wife or the husband and the children? What about the siblings? What about the nephews and nieces? And you end up going very far down the population food chain. What do you think might be a more practical way to do it is simply to say anybody who has a relative who occupies a position in the executive, a cabinet, or provincial MEC, or a mayor, etc., the kind of politically influential persons according to the FICA Act, they have a right to apply for tenders like anybody else does in society, but that relationship must be disclosed. And then we want to see a register provided for in the regulations, which will say that this wife of a minister, or this husband of a premier, this daughter of a mayor has gotten this tender. And that might not be a criminal act itself, but if you can begin to pick up on a pattern that all of a sudden one minister's child is getting multiple contracts to provide multi-million rand goods, that should raise eyebrows and begin to set a bit of scrutiny and investigation to what's going on. So we think that the most effective way really is having maximum scrutiny, maximum transparency. Let's disclose what's happening, because then you're going to begin to shift culture and begin to change how people behave and hopefully nudge people in the right direction. Because right now we've seen time and again politicians, families get in trouble for right reasons, for wrong reasons, and it puts all of us into a huge amount of crisis as a country, and we really need to change that going forward. So that we still need to fight more on. We've made some progress on it at NEDLAC, but we hope we can see in the final regulations that disclosure of relatives getting business tenders being disclosed, and then we can have real transparency from the media side.
Matthew Parks, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for coming on. That is Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator there, Matthew Parks.